Alrighty, howdy folks. So this is going to just be me recording this video for whatever reason. The video on Twitch I cannot highlight from and post a video from. So instead, it's just me in my room at night before I go to bed, recording this economics video. So I apologize for not being able to get it out yesterday to you folks. I was trying to upload it in the morning, and for whatever reason, the video would not let me highlight the clip to export it to YouTube and then upload on that link up on the Canvas for you guys. So yesterday, the students were able to just do their test corrections anyways, and for econ that is, but for the dual credit students, you guys just went ahead and read. So this is the legal system. We're talking about sources of economic progress in this part of the book, okay? And there's 7 sources. In the first one, all the other sources are going to lie on top of. And that is a legal system that protects individuals, because we talk so much in economics about how incentives matter. A lot of those incentives actually come from the legal system or the rule of law that we here in the States actually take for granted for the most part. Okay? I mean, and so if you look at all these green areas, areas that we typically deem the West, there's one little outlier here, right? You do have Saudi Arabia here. But a lot of these green areas, why they're so wealthy is because, not necessarily because they have any natural resources that make them so much better than everywhere else, right? Some of these places actually are not too remarkable for their natural resources, and some of these areas in the red are actually, have a lot of valuable natural resources, yet they're not wealthy, right? Because these green areas, it means they have a high GDP per capita, which we said was a good measure of, material wealth. Yeah, so what enables these countries to have a high GDP per capita, or what's enabled them to have a high GDP per capita, has actually been their ability to protect individuals' property rights and enable them to have the incentive to take on production that enables us to have more production and therefore a higher material well-being for those that live in these areas. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and skip past this. This is just a fun video if you want to watch it, where he talks about how good life is, yet everyone takes it for granted. Guys, we are given incentives to pursue methods that lead to production only because we get to reap those benefits, right? We talked earlier about how we want entrepreneurs to create profits, because that means they're taking resources and turning them into something that's valued more, right? And how they're incentivized to do that because they get to keep the profit, right? And how we want them to do that because then that means we have a valuable use of our resources, right? So I gotta ask though, if that can be taken from them, what incentive is there to take care of the things that you have? What incentive is there to produce, right? So private property is very important because it gives us the incentives that we can act upon in order to continue to better ourselves, okay? And the same thing is true for enforcing contracts, right? Because contracts are a way that we trade with each other without having to trade our goods, right away, perhaps. So, we are wealthier because we make contracts, because they enable us to trade in different ways. But if those contracts aren't going to be enforced, we're not going to be making contracts, right? If I can't enforce a contract with you, there's no reason that I would make a contract with you, right? So we need to make sure that these contracts are enforced. Otherwise, they don't happen. And we know that when we do trade, with contracts as well, it makes us wealthier because we're able to trade more. We get wealthier the more we trade, okay? So we need to have a system in which individuals, their private property is protected, and we can enforce contracts. Okay, so private property rights, they give us the ability, okay, it's like a bundle of rights where we can buy stuff, right? We can sell stuff. Yeah, I can give my property to someone else, and I can derive income from it. I can have someone use it and get income for it, right? And the thing is cool. The thing that's cool is that we can kind of transfer our property rights. Yeah, if I'm renting a house, I have a lot different set of rights as when I buy a house, right? If I buy the house, I can do whatever I want, right? If I'm renting the house though, I can't just go like, yeah, you know what? I don't like that wall. Let's tear it down. I can't do that if I'm renting the house, right? So your property rights can kind of change based on what level of them you have, but the point is, whatever those rights are, they're going to change your incentives. Yeah, you may rev the engine of a rented car more than you rev the engine of your own car, right? Because you want to take care of your own car. Yeah. Or, you may drive safer in a rented car because, you don't want to have to do all the paperwork and jump through all the hoops should something happen in that rental as opposed to it happening in your own. Okay. So property rights, they encourage us to use our resources productively. Okay. And the thing is, because what you earn is yours and you don't have to worry about anyone else coming to take it, you have a reason to cut costs now. You have a reason to lower your costs. You have a reason to not just lower how much you're using, but also to use your resources to produce the most that you can, to get the most and be the most efficient that you can, because everything that you earn is going to be yours, right? Your profit it belongs to you and nobody else, right? That's the idea of property rights, and that's the incentive that it gives you. You can see how it enables you to produce more. Your book has a fantastic example. You guys should read it. Talking about Soviet farmers. Matter of fact, let's see if I can find it here. But I think it was on something like 5% of land. I don't want to take the time to find it. Something like 5% of the land in the Soviet Union, they enabled individuals to own, right? Because in the Soviet Union, it was this communist country. And in the Soviet Union, they enabled 5% of the land used for farming, to be owned by individuals. And that 5% of the land produced 40%. Whew, hopefully no Rona. Produced 40%. 40%. 5% of the farming land produced 40% of the agricultural produce. Right, and that's not because the people working on the private fields were better. That's not because the people working on the public fields were nitwits. It's because the incentives were different, right? If on that 5% of land, those people were enabled to keep what they produced. On the public land, they were not permitted to keep anything of what they produced, right? So we can see how when the incentives are different, then decisions are different, and that's no different with property rights, guys. So, property rights enable people not just to care about what they can earn, but also what they can earn in the future. Yeah? I'm going to treat my car nicely because there's going to come a time where if I don't drive the thing into the ground, then I'm going to be able to sell it to somebody else. So I want to keep good care of my car. Yeah, I don't want to get into any car wrecks because then it's going to be worth less when someone looks up the Carfax, right? And they'll see that it's been in a wreck before. They may not want to buy it. People won't want to buy it as much if it smells like cigarette smoke. So I'm not going to smoke in my car. A, because I want my car to have value, and B, because, well, I don't like, getting the black lung. Okay, so property rights aren't just for now. They also encourage us to conserve, right? I may be a person that plants trees on my property. Now you think, what's the point of planting trees, on your property? You're not going to be there when they grow. Mr. Weaver, you're young, you're prone to move, right? So why would you plant trees on your property? Well, if I think that people in the future would value trees being on the property, I may plant them, and then by the time I'm gone and selling my house to somebody, because they value the trees being there, they may be willing to pay more for the house, right? I was actually talking to a person that works at a company that they tear down trees, and apparently trees can actually go for a lot if they're mature and can be harvested for the wood. They're talking like 5-digit numbers. Some of these trees that they cut down, they can sell the lumber to these lumber houses. Crazy. Anyways, they also again, not just, so they encourage us not just, I pose this question more towards the future, but it's also for other people, right? It encourages us to, the reason why I may be growing trees on my property is because someone else may like it. The reason why I keep my car looking nice is so someone else will like it. In the same way, I already talked about this, but it enables us to conserve, okay? Property rights promote conservation of resources, right? I take care of my house, not just because someone else wants it, because it'll last longer, right? I won't overfish in a pond that I own because I want my fish to continue to be there, right? So property rights encourage us to conserve, because when we own it, that means we own it, potentially, forever. And if we can continue to give it to someone that we know will be able to conserve it as well, okay? So property rights encourage us to conserve. So, I do this activity in class where we go fishing. I'm not going to be able to do this, so instead let's transfer to Minecraft, okay? See, Minecraft, I have some cows here, and in Minecraft, it's very, very hard to find an animal on a populated server on the surface near spawn, because all the animals right away get killed. You think, why is it? You can breed animals in Minecraft. So why don't people breed the animals? Well, they know that if they try to breed them, someone can just come by and kill all the animals, and then there's no animals. So you might as well be the person that kills the animal to get their meat and their hide, so you can make bookshelves and all that stuff. Okay, so because there's only an incentive to consume, right? It's open to everybody to consume, but no one can prevent anyone from going in and stopping the use of that resource, right? So this is what we call a commonly held resource. It's open to everybody, and when you use it, it prevents me from using it. Okay, so when you kill a cow, that's one less cow for me. So all it does is incentivize people to go out there and use it. Okay, the tragedy of the commons exists whenever there's a resource which is open to everybody. The problem of this commons that we refer to is the absence of any automatic mechanism or incentive to prevent the overuse and depletion of a commonly held resource. And this happens all over, right? This happens in the oceans, where people may pollute more in the ocean than they would in their own backyard because that pollution is going to float away and it's not going to be your worry, all right? Everyone consumes the ocean. There's also some worries of overfishing, right, where no one owns the fish that are out in international waters, so they'll go out there and they'll fish a whole bunch of those fish, and next thing you know, we're getting reports of the levels of fish being out there being alarmingly low because there's only an incentive to consume. Okay, same thing with clean air. When we don't know who owns what air, right? Because normally if you use someone else's resource, you get in trouble for it, right? Because you're violating their property rights. But whose fish are whose? Who's clean? Who owns the air? Who owns the water? If these aren't defined properly, we can have people, consuming or polluting the air more than we otherwise would like, right? Another great example is wildlife and flowers. Yeah, if everyone went out and hunted as much as they want to, that we could find ourselves without any deer to hunt, right? If everyone went into this field and picked the beautiful flowers, there would be no beautiful flowers, right? Because there's only an incentive to consume. Why would you plant the flowers? Someone else is just going to come by and pick them, right? So these are great examples of the tragedy of the commons because they only incentivize consumption. There's no incentive to conserve. The buffalo are another great example, right? If we look back at history, 1870, right, just as we start going into the West, there were 14 million buffalo estimated, okay? By the time we get to 1889, 150. They're near extinction at this period. Yet today, it's relatively easy to go see a buffalo, okay? So something must have happened. What happened to make them decrease in population, and what happened to bring them back from the brink of extinction, okay? Well, they're an animal out in the West, and to be fair, they were a nuisance, right? People didn't like them, and no one owned them, so if you could just kill them. People actually often hunted them for sport from the back of a train, okay? They would get in the ways of trains. If you're a rancher, they were just out there being a nuisance. So if you're trying to have your ranch of actually domesticated animals, you don't want to have these buffalo running around and taking some grazing on the land that your own animals could graze on. So they would often just kill them from the back of these trains, okay? Matter of fact, we hunted so many of them because there were so many reasons to consume them, right? For sport, also for food. The army used them as a food source, and sadly, as the army would move in, as they were combating the Native Americans, they knew the Native Americans used them as a food source, so they would also kill them so the natives couldn't get them. There was all the reasons in the world, whether they were good or bad, to consume the buffalo. There was not a reason to conserve the buffalo. You can see how this is a tragedy of the commons. And of course, I talk about Native Americans, guys, it's not just that these Westerners came over and they were horrible. See, people respond to incentives, right? So even when it was just the Native Americans, they themselves were contributing towards the tragedy of the commons with these buffalo. Okay, this here is a plateau, and one of the ways that Native Americans would hunt the buffalo is because these buffalo was to just run them off this rock, right? You think, why in the world would they do that? Well, buffalo, they're these big animals, right? They have horns on their head, right? And they travel in these huge packs with one another. So if you're trying to bring one of these down and he's got like 10 buddies behind him that are going to try to gore you, that's not a fun idea, yeah? So instead what they would do they would spook a whole bunch of them and run them off a cliff. And they wouldn't survive the fall. It made it a lot easier, okay? So instead of just being able to kill, how many ever they needed for their group, they would kill the whole herd. And just the rest, well, the rest was laid there, okay? So you can see how they killed a whole bunch. So what we didn't really just like, oh, the Westerners came in and they just killed all of these buffalo. How dare they? It's more like there was the buffalo, and they were exposed to the tragedy of the commons when it was just the Native Americans. All we did was add more people. Okay, that's all that happened. And we can see that then, when you have more people, you're going to have more people consuming this open resource. So what can we do? Well, we can try to tax it, but that can be very hard, right? Because we just got done talking about how supply and demand is constantly shifting and prices are always changing. So if the government tries to put in a tax to match how, okay, well, if we value it at this, then we'll just, people are using it too much because they don't have they can't see how much it truly costs. So let's just, put a tax there to kind of act as a price. Well, we know prices always change, right? So that can lead to some problems. And we can maybe try to, instead of doing a tax thing, we can try to do a regulation thing like we do with fishing or hunting, where you have to have a license. But then if we don't release enough licenses, then that's going to lead to things like poaching, right? So with that, those aren't necessarily pretty answers. One thing that economists have, thought of recently is privatizing. One way to cure the tragedy of the commons is to make it so other people can't use it. So then there is also a reason, not just to consume, but also a reason to conserve, right? A reason to put forth in the future. In the same way that you wouldn't overfish your pond, if you own buffalo, you don't want to kill all the buffalo because you want to produce more buffalo so you can have more in the future, right? That's the idea here. We can privatize it, turn this common resource into a private good, okay? You see, property rights, they stop the tragedy of the commons because people now have an incentive to take care of the property. When we privatize resources, when we privatize the tragedy of the commons, those resources gain value, and therefore there's a reason for them to no longer not be conserved, okay? People are going to try to conserve them more, okay? And the resources are then used more efficiently, right? Because it's not efficient to use a resource until it depletes, right? People don't have a reason to economize, but when we give property rights to individuals so they can own these things, they're used more efficiently. Here in this slide here, you can see a picture in the bottom right of two separate fields that were used for grazing. The one on the left, private property. They have a reason to make sure that it's not overgrazed by the animals, right? The one on the right, that is public land. There's no reason for anyone to stop their animals from overgrazing, because even if they have their animal not overgrazed, someone else will just have their animal graze too much, right? So, if we look at the buffalo today, it's a beautiful story, okay? On the government-managed land, there's about 20,000 buffalo, okay, in parks like Yellowstone. If you were to look at the privately owned buffalo, there's an estimated 500,000 buffalo. This number's probably outdated. Got the number from a couple years ago. And apparently, the private buffalo population increases by about 25 to 30% every year. Wow. It's crazy. Well, why is that? Well, why is it that they grow so well on private land? Well, it's because there's this little thing called demand, right? And when there's demand to meet, supply will be right there to meet it. And man, I'm saying meat a lot. It's almost as if I have it on the mind. Yeah, guys, the reason why buffalo are grown so much today is because of their meat. Apparently, it's a very tasty burger. So it may seem counterproductive that the best way to save an animal from the brink of extinction is to eat it, but we've also seen the same idea with some other extinct animals, where people will set up these conservatories for these near extinct animals. And when an animal's about to die, instead of just letting it wither away and die, they'll allow a hunter to come in and hunt it for a very, very high price. And then the money that they earn from this hunting trip, this conservatory can then put that towards, providing for the breeding of more of these extinct animals, right? It sounds counterintuitive, but it's really bringing these animals back from extinction. Just like our friend the buffalo here, okay? So the thing is, though, property rights have to have these four things, or these things, if they're going to be effective. Okay, they have to be clear and defined. If I don't know what you own and you don't know what I own, it's very, we might as well not have property rights. Okay, people has to know who owns what, right? You know, we do this with fences, right? Was it Professor Kessler? He says, apparently it's a famous phrase, but happy fences make happy neighbors, right? When you know who owns what, it's easier to get along with people because you're not going to be overstepping any boundaries, right? We can't have the, like apparently they do down in the South. I think there was 2 states that were fighting over who owned a lake because they used on the public documents, it was, you know, this property extends down to that tree, and that property starts and it begins at that rock and it goes down to that river, and they use landmarks like that, and that's very hard because, you know, those landmarks over time, what tree, what river, that dried up years ago, right? Like, it's very hard to do. Yeah. So when things are clear and defined, I can know what you own, you can know what I own, and we can be able to respect that then. Okay? They have to be enforced. Guys, if someone can come in and take your TV and get away with it and nothing happens, is it really your TV? Do you really have property rights if they're not enforced? People can't just steal. Because if people can just steal, there's no incentive then for you to take care of your stuff. It's like, why should I take care of it? Someone can just take it anyways, right? If you know someone's going to come in, then it doesn't make sense, you know, for you to worry about it. And that's not just that, but you know, if you're then worried about making sure that your property remains yours, you're going to put a lot of resources into making sure that you know, you get to maintain your property, right? You know, imagine if you had to stay home in order to make sure none of your stuff gets stolen. I mean, we all leave for the day, we lock our houses up, and we know people can break in, but we assume they won't because we have private property rights. That's an example of how we take these for granted, how they make us so much more productive, right? And they have to be excludable. If I could just, you know, go into your locker and take whatever snacks I wanted, you know, would you really have a reason to bring snacks to school? And could you even say that those snacks were yours if I just had the right to do that? Yeah. So they have to be excludable. The owner has to be able to prevent access. Like in this water park, you know, if this water park isn't able to keep people out, are they really able to say that it's theirs? All right. They have to be excludable. Otherwise, it may as well be like they don't even exist. And another key part of them, guys, is that they have to be transferable. Okay, them being transferable is what enables us to have that incentive to take care of our property, to conserve our property, for not just when we own it, but when others own it. Right? They have to be transferable. So, what about intellectual property? Right? What about the, you know, ideas? Right? If you have ownership over ideas that you originate, well, let's extend that a little bit. Do you have an incentive to invent more and innovate? Right? This is where we get an argument for intellectual property. This is what our founding fathers said, right? Even in our Constitution, we have this idea of not just property that you can hold, but also the property of your ideas, okay? So some people say that ownership over ideas, this leads then to us getting more technological advances or better technology in the same way that owning real property enables people to produce more, okay? Because you own physical property, you produce more. If you own intellectual property, you'll produce more ideas, right? That's the argument. At least, I will say, not everybody agrees necessarily on this, but this is something that's an important aspect from our book, and very certainly it's something that American is in the U.S. Constitution. So it's important to understand why we have this. Okay. So, if you were to look at this map, this is a map of the Korean Peninsula. Okay, where are the property rights at? Okay, this isn't just more ocean right here, guys. This is North Korea. Okay, we took in the mid 1900s the same group of people, same DNA, same culture, same heritage, same area, same customs, same everything, and you can see where the property rights are, and that's in this area where it's lit up. Okay, South Korea is doing amazing. North Korea, there's no lights at all. Okay, it's not just that, but if you're also to compare the people, the men in North Korea, on average, are shorter than the females in South Korea. Okay, when people are able to have easy access to goods and services that they need in order to survive and thrive, it turns out that they end up getting bigger, right? Just like how, you know, today, you know, we as humans are a lot taller than the humans of yesteryear because we have easier access to food and we can grow more easily. In the same way, sadly, the people in North Korea have not been able to thrive. So let's take a look at this documentary about how different the well-being is in these countries. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead.
And down here, an axis for wealth.
So we have lifespan on this axis, and we have income on this axis.
And $40,000. So down
I'm going to put on my
here
gamer
is
ears.
poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world?
This guy's so happy about
Industrial
data.
Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe! And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai.
It's really wild how you can split a country like this, right?
Health as Italy today. And there
Take the urban parts of China
like
and the rural parts.
And if I split it further,
and the even more rural parts
are like Ghana in Africa. And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world.
So the good news is, we're all moving up.
And I see a clear trend into the future.
Right, we're all getting wealthier and healthier, okay? Still, though, there's these countries up here, and then there's some of these countries down here. If you remember, the blue was sub-Saharan Africa, right? And guys, if we come back and we look, at this here, that looks true, right? The GDP per capita is relatively low in these areas. And again, if you were to look at property rights, it's very hard for them to have well-defined, transferable property rights that enable the productive use of resources. Okay, so it is very important that property rights exist so that we can better use our resources. So we got to ask then, why is economic growth good? Why is it that we want to see GDP per capita increasing? Well, people overall, as we just saw with those numbers, people have relatively higher incomes. Poor people do, right? The countries that were poor got better. The countries that were relatively rich got poorer. This is true on an individual level. People that come from families that were poor got more wealthy. Those that were in richer families, they may have gotten they have gotten wealthier. Sure, some of them have gotten poorer, I'm sure, as well. My point is, everyone is better off, right? Even those that, still, maybe went down a social class, they're better off than they would have been, 100 years ago, right? Compare yourself to John D. Rockefeller, right? The richest man during the Industrial Revolution, okay? No matter where you're at in America, so long as if you're just above the poverty level, or even just below the poverty level, you are better off than John D. Rockefeller, okay? Because you're in a place with a roof over your head, okay? You might have the odds that you have air conditioning are highly likely. The odds that you have the ability to refrigerate, your food is highly likely, okay? The ability of you to have all of these gizmos and gadgets, a phone, to be able to look at whatever you want to, whenever you want to, and educate yourself. Without a doubt, most people alive today are better off than the richest people of years ago. Okay, and that's because of economic growth. Okay, people live longer, not just the rich, but also the poor and everyone in between. Okay, people are consuming more goods today. People are getting things that better their lives more today across the board than the richest people of years ago. Okay, that's why economic growth is good. Okay, so how do we get that economic growth? Again, by supporting property rights. Okay, by having property rights, we allow competition to then exist. Okay, we enable these companies to produce, and when they produce, they have to produce, while trying to get business from each other, because if they're not getting business, they're not going to exist, right? So they have to compete, and because they're competing, this encourages technological progress, right? It also, having property rights, this also enables people to trade freely, and this enables the invisible hand to move products, goods, services, resources from those that value them less to people that value them more. Okay, and we know that that's what will enable us to be able to get the most productive use out of a resource. So guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you later. Bye.